All right, welcome to how combat works in Orlando Darkened. First, we are using a modified system which I am calling narrative combat. Narrative combat ignores initiative, so we will never talk about initiative ever again. Narrative combat goes in phases. The players act, the bad guys act, consequences occur. The players have a set time limit, average is going to be about 10 minutes, to make their combat attack and to roll their dice. And they will narrate in the channel what it looks like, and in parentheses at the end, how many successes they got to hit, and then how much damage they did. We'll talk about those mechanics in a minute. While that's going on, the storyteller will be doing the same thing, but on the bad guy's side. The downside to the system is that you lose the initiative fact of being able to one-shot a monster. The upside is that you don't spend all this time sort of sitting around twiddling your thumbs while other people are acting. All the players act, all the bad guys act. The consequences section is where damage is dealt with. Soak rolls occur on the bad guys and good guys' side. Any sort of effects from spells or environment or whatever. Like, players act, bad guys act, consequences happen. After that is bonus rounds. Bonus rounds won't always apply, but like celerity actions, rage actions, time magic actions, things like that. I'm going to provide this from the perspective of someone who either hasn't done D10 combat ever, like tabletop-wise, or hasn't done it forever. So this will be a refresher / primer for how this works. So, in case you don't know, these are D10s, right? Duh. We'll talk about initiative briefly just for systems that do use it, and then we're going to ignore it again. Initiative says I take 1 D10 and I roll it. I got an 8. And you add that to the number of your dex and wits. So if I have a dex of 3 and a wits of 3, I'm going to take 8 plus 6 and get 14. That's my initiative. We will never talk about initiative again because we're not going to use it. Now, for the player's action, for you to go do a thing, you are going to take a number of dice to represent your attribute and your ability depending on what you're doing. If you are punching a guy, you're going to take your strength and your brawl, your dex and your brawl to hit the guy. The 2 hit rolls are always based in dexterity. This is representing your ability to land the punch. So let's imagine for a moment we have a character that is, not super amazing at combat, but is average, right? They have a dexterity of 3, they have a brawl of 3. Now we talk about what number you need on the die. If you are doing hand-to-hand combat, that number heavily depends on what you're doing. Each book has a chart that says if you are biting them, it's this difficulty. If you are punching them, it's this difficulty. If you're using martial arts instead of just brawl or melee, depending on what technique you're doing, it's this difficulty. Do yourself a favor, and if you have martial arts or you have a specific thing you want to do in a fight, go look up that chart beforehand, and every single character sheet has a little cheat sheet that you can put at the bottom to say, punch attack, here's my difficulty, here's my damage. So, 2 hit is always dexterity plus whatever your appropriate ability is. If you're shooting a gun, it's dexterity firearms. If you're punching a person, it's dexterity brawl. If you're attacking with a sword, dexterity melee, etc. If you're doing hand-to-hand combat, the difficulties change. If you're doing ranged combat, the difficulty is always 6, unless there are modifiers, such as it's hard to see, or you've got a scope, or whatever. Now, once you have figured out whatever your target number is, average target number is 6, sometimes it's down to 5, etc. Magic, of course, will always mess with that and make it higher, make it lower, whatever. Once you have figured out what your target number is, you roll your attack. Okay? Let's assume we hit, right? Let's assume that we get 3 successes to hit. All right, so here's how this works. Let's say you are using a sword, okay? We have our strength of 3. A sword gives you 2 more as weapon bonus to damage. And you had 3 successes to hit. Now, you hit them. Awesome. Every success after that first one goes to damage. So now this is your damage pool. We hit them really hard, plus my strength, plus the weapon. If we got 5 successes to hit, now the first one is the hit, and now we have 4 extra dice towards damage. The harder, better you hit somebody, the more damage you are likely to do. Is it possible to hit somebody with 7 successes to hit and just like not roll any successes on damage? Yeah, that's totally a thing. It happens. The dice sometimes hate you. But okay. I hit you really hard. My strength, my weapon. Now, if we're dealing with firearms attacks, right? Let's say it's just a handgun, right? The damage on the guns are set. It is a standard 4. How strong you are doesn't matter. But if we get 4 successes to shoot somebody, the first one is the I hit you, and now our damage is 7. The weapons damage and I hit you really well, or I aimed really well, whatever. So, difficulty for doing damage is always 6 unless there's magic that affects it. It is important to remember that the universe can't fail, so you do not subtract 1s. If you roll 5 successes and 2 1s, you still do 5 damage regardless. The type of damage is, of course, determined by the weapon. Okay, so to hit, attribute plus ability. To damage, depends on the weapon, depends on what you're doing. If it's ranged, the damage is flat. If it's brawl or melee or anything of that sort, it is strength plus the weapon, plus however, like I hit you really well dice. Now let's talk about soaking. Soaking gets a little complicated because it depends what venue you're in, but on average, humans can soak bashing damage, right? You can be punched and not die. Humans cannot soak lethal or aggravated damage. Armor lets you soak lethal. Magical armor lets you soak aggravated and everything down. And for mage, if you use prime magic to like reinforce someone's pattern, you can let them use their stamina to soak aggravated damage. Werewolves are different. Vampires are different. Changelings can soak chimerical damage with their stamina, but real damage, weird damage, is as normal. Okay. Let's say you have taken 3 damage, and you have 3 stamina and 2 armor. If this is 3 bashing, you roll all of these. Difficulty 6, and the universe cannot fail, so 1s don't subtract. Right? This is just your body's ability to take a blow. So they're punching you through your normal stamina and the fact that you're wearing a Kevlar breastplate, right? They're punching you in the chest. We could get it down the rabbit hole of called shots, but that's like advanced nonsense and we don't really need it for narrative dice. Okay. They're shooting you, however, and we're not assuming magic. Well, those don't matter anymore, just the armor you're wearing. Okay, now we're dealing with aggravated damage, right? Someone is throwing a lightning bolt at you, or primal fire, or werewolf claws. None of this matters. You don't get a soak. We're mages, most of us, at least the sort of my target audience here. And we use prime, right? Prime can be used to imbue a weapon to do ag, or to imbue a pattern to resist ag. So, okay, somebody uses prime, let's be honest, probably Fee. Uses prime to reinforce your pattern. Cool, somebody does ag to you. You can now soak it with your stamina. If your armor is not imbued, the armor doesn't count. That's your soak pool. If your armor is imbued also, cool, now you're soaking it with the whole shebang. And again, soak difficulties are 6, barring magic adjusting that number up or down. Your amount of damage you take is whatever's left over after the soak. If you soak it all, then you took the hit, you looked at the monster and told it it hits like a bitch, and carried on with life. Now, we'll add one or two small complications, and we will move on. If I have 4 successes to hit you, and part of your action is dodging, and you get 3 successes on your dodge roll, what that does is it takes away 3 of my successes. So I still hit you, but I don't get my I hit you really well dice. If I get 4 successes to hit you and you get 4 successes to dodge, whiff. No damage whatsoever. We don't move on. Last thing, and then we'll talk about splitting dice pools. Splitting dice pools is I want to do 2 things at once. So here's how this works. I want to shoot my gun, and I want to dodge, right? I am expecting to get shot back at. So here's how this works. Let's imagine for a moment I have a dex firearms of 7. Okay, I have a dex of 3, and I have a firearms of 4, sorry. And let's imagine I have a athletics or dodge ability of 3, right? My dex is still 3, but that hasn't changed. So if I want to split these pools, right, I want to do both in the same action. You take the smallest pool, so those don't matter anymore. We take the smallest pool and we split that dice pool, right? And say, well, I'm going to take 4 dice to my combat action and 2 dice to my dodge. Now you can see where that's not super optimal, right? This is a really small attack pool. This is a really small defense pool. This is where sort of some strategy comes into and how you use your magic and how you use your powers. Because this is where bonus rounds and extra actions come into play, where yes, I have, this kind of a situation set up, but I'm going to take my everyman round, my main combat round, to dodge, and then on my time 3 bonus action, thanks to Callie, I'm going to shoot you, right? Multiple actions is always going to be better than having to split your dice pool. This is where we note that Werewolf is unfair. Werewolf gets to split their dice pools significantly differently because they are literally part animal. They operate on instinct in combat. They don't have to think about what they're doing. Mechanically, it's a little unfair. However, as a general rule, this isn't a PvP venue, so I'm not worried about that. And if you go on a werewolf combat plot, you knew what you were getting into. Just going to put that out there. So, in conclusion, ignore initiative. We're not using it anymore. You have your attack dice, right? Your attribute plus your ability. Difficulty depends on what you're doing. Firearms is always going to be 6, barring modifiers. Physical depends what you're doing, and then depends on the modifiers. All of that can be messed with via magic. Once you have hit, you have your I hit you dice, and then you have any extra successes that go to damage. You have, if it's melee, your strength plus your weapon plus how well you hit. If it's just a firearm, you have your base firearm damage plus how well you hit. And then from that, you do damage. That damage is then soaked by stamina alone or stamina plus armor. depending on the type of damage and what magic has been done on the armor. Thank you, and this has been super quick combat primer for people returning to tabletop mechanics that may not have used them in a long time.